This is Ethan Moore for Theory 4 Final Project, Video Analysis with Slides. Today we are going to be discussing Luigi Dallapiccola's Quaderno Musicale di Anna Libera, number 5 specifically, and looking at the piece Contrapuntus Secundus. Before we move on to specific analysis, I think it's quite valuable to get a little background information on the man himself, Luigi, and how he came about to arrive at such a specific and detailed and intricate compositional style using 12-tone serialism. Luigi Dallapiccola, 1904 to 1975, born in 1904, and he was born in an ethnically Italian region of Austro-Hungary. So he was just 10 years old when his family was interned at Graz. So we're talking about his life taking place during a very, very tumultuous period in human history. And he experienced both living through World War I and World War II, had to deal with the enormous stress of that throughout his life. In Graz, though, he was introduced to his first musical inspirations. And then after that, he entered the Florence Conservatory and Institute, where he would maintain a lifelong connection because he later taught there. His early work showed him grappling with a range of disparate influences, everything from Debussy until he was finally introduced to 12-tone through being influenced by Schoenberg. In 1934, he was appointed, that's when he took his position at Florence Conservatory, and he held that position until his retirement. So his heavy influences with 12-tone were, of course, Schoenberg, Byrne, and others. So he didn't have a direct contact with them as far as studying with them, but the Second Viennese School, that is, but he was heavily influenced by them. So his work was widely serialist, and he developed his own personal style through his Italian background. Throughout the 1930s, his style developed from diatonic style with bursts of chromatism to serialism. He went from using 12-tone rows for melodic material to structuring his entire work serially, and that's what we'll be looking at today. With the adoption of serialism, he never lost the feel of melodic line. Now, this is where he, takes on a personal and a specific type of character to his music. His disillusionment with Mussolini's regime affected a change in his style. So this also kind of touches on what I wanted to get at, which is how does a composer who has obviously so many European styles and Italian influences, from opera to, symphonies and such, like Mahler and such, at any rate, how does he arrive at such a contrived and detailed and controlled style? And it is my theory that he combines 12-tone serialism with lyricism and romanticism and expressionism from his Italian background, but that because of the stress of living through World War I and World War II and the censorship, the trauma, the totalitarian and fascist governments that he had to contend to. He even had to go into hiding several times because his wife was Jewish. Because of all of these things, he really arrived at a place where he wanted compositional control. A further interesting element is that his father was a language teacher, and he is said to have arrived at his own type of musical language through his technique. So I think during that time, all the stress that composers were put under, there was a little bit of a disillusionment with the standard status quo and with the pressures that totalitarian governments were forcing composers to adhere to in following strict classical tonal composition in music. So a lot of composers wanted to break out from that, wanted to obviously find their own way. And this is definitely the case with Luigi Dallapiccola. And also, just going along with that, he was influenced by the Viennese school, as we said, and found his own avant-garde approach to his own lyricism and his own language. Now, looking specifically at Quaderno Musicale di Ana Libera, number 5, Canto Puntas Segundas topics. So I do want to also, take a little bit of time to just go over what the Quaderno Musicale di Ana Libera is specifically, how this piece fits into it. So a description and characteristics of the piece at large. Then we will specifically, these are our topics here, but then we'll go and specifically look at the contrapuntus secundus, its characteristics, form, etc., and look at the tone row, the 12-tone matrix that he utilizes for his compositions here. We'll talk about how the rows are used and organized, the characteristic manipulations that he uses in the contrapuntus secundus, and just concluding, bring together my thesis that Dallapiccola's 12-tone technique achieves a lyricism through intentional use of phrasing along with contour. Now, the Quaderno Musical di Ana Librera, translated musical notebook of Ana Librera. Does that title remind you of anything? Well, it certainly does. It is influenced by Bach's notebook for Anna Magdalena. But this piece was, overall, the composition was written in 1952. It is made up of 11 short pieces for solo piano. And when we say short, we mean very short. The level of detail and intricacy and attention that is given to every single pitch, class, and note throughout the work, I think it just requires so much diligent concentration and focus that the works are really, really, really become rich in content in very small periods of time, in very small clusters and sequences. So these 11 short solo piano works are from 27 seconds to up to only 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And, they show a lot of different character. They go from pieces that actually sound quite tonal and characteristic to pieces that are more what you would, the average listener would say would be stereotypical 12-tone atonal. And he finds, as his compositional style, he finds a kind of a medium point and utilizes certain characteristics to kind of call upon tonal techniques without actually being tonal in any sense because of the dedication to the tone rows. This piece was dedicated to his daughter, and here we go again with the classic influence. It was influenced by Bach in form and in counterpuntal orientation, which is shown in the 3 pieces that are the contrapuntus. The title echoes Bach's notebooks for Anna Magdalena as stated, and literally contains Bach, the motive, throughout. Suggesting the idea, this continues the idea that Schoenberg kind of had, where he was just continuing the classical tradition and taking it on to the next level, advancing the tradition, as opposed to having atonal music replacing the tradition. So you can see clearly that Luigi Dallapiccola is in this same line of thought here, because he uses such classic material for organizing and even titling his work. 12-tone serial rows are manipulated to form the composition, and he adheres to them very strictly and very purposefully. There's intense attention also given to articulation markings and texture. So here it kind of continues with the theme that Dallapiccola, I believe, because of all the pressures in his own life, was very, very inclined and found very appealing, giving the composer a lot of control. And also, through that control, kind of developing his own musical language to the point that it was, would go against what totalitarian regimes such as Mussolini was trying to put on the people of affecting Italy and Spain in the Spanish Civil War and things like that. So I think that he kind of found a lot of solace in being able to use a system that was heavily encoded and heavily spoke kind of like this encoded language that only those who are trained could really understand. So it's almost like through his art, he had this subversive technique that was embedded in his compositions. And the level of intricacy and elaborateness that he was able to achieve through this is quite impressive. But enough of that, on to the specific topic at hand, the contrapunctus secundus. Now, we're talking about a two-part form in the secundus, which is an A-B section. He utilizes pretty simplistic sections, or rather simplistic forms throughout the 11 pieces here. And the secundus in particular is in an A-B section format. These sections are of even measures, 4 bars apiece. And then he uses in the second half, in the B section, inversionally related or contrarily related tone rows, showing that contrary motion and establishing it as a canon. Here is the tone matrix that he utilizes, and I arrived at this by isolating the prime form and then moving that, obviously transposing that to P0 and saving the intervallic relationships. So then you just transpose it up, 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 ba, 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 bam. My own personal technique for this is simply following the P up, the P rows up 1, 2, 3, 4 sequentially, and then adding a number on for each additional pitch class, therefore arriving at the same intervals, transposing the prime row. The interval quality is rather specific and rather important in that by maintaining these intervals, he not only establishes a relationship within each row, and then the intervals obviously are inverted for the inverted rows and shown backwards for the R rows, but the intervals that he chooses are also very specific, because within the structure of each row there is an order and a selected of selected chords that you can find, and these repeat at specific times with specific numbers of pitch class sets. This is also the way that he achieves, or similar to the way that he achieves, placing the Bach motive throughout the work. And now to look more closely at the specific rows in use and how he executes these rows through the contrapunctus secundus. Now, number 5, contrapunctus secundus, is a contrario, a canon contrario motu. So that's simply stating it is a contrary motion canon where the rows are reversed and relate to each other. So the initial rows that he uses here are kind of divided. You can see in the score the specificity of his textures that he uses, as well as the specificity of directions for the dynamics in each note. There's almost a marking on every single note throughout the work and throughout the larger composition itself as well. So he specifies how notes are to be played, when they are to be played, and he also specifies when the performer is to like cross over right hand and so forth and so on. You can see the switching of the clefs throughout this work. All right, so within the secundus, we have, of course, 8 measures of music, as priorly stated. They're in an A section within the first 4, and then the B section, which replicates that, or rather inversionally relates that. And you can see some of these rows, which I have identified. I have marked them specifically and very purposefully, because these are the ones that I think show the most character and the most specific choices that the composer has made to illustrate how the canon is to be inversionally related. It definitely takes a lot of due attention to find all these specifics, and you can see that if you look further, that they're inverted, so that if you plotted it on a pitch class clock, he uses the inversions from 0 to 6, which is obviously the north to south inversion from C to F sharp. And you can show those relationships if you look closer at the pitch class rows that he chooses. And then the other type of inversion that he uses is horizontal inversion from 9 to 3, or A to E flat. And just again to echo what I was stating, it is interesting that Dallapiccola finds a type of lyricism in his composition of serialism. And I think that is partially due to the contour that you see repeated, going from high to low throughout the tone rows. It's also due to the instructions that he gives as far as dynamics, and therefore he was able to achieve a high level of romanticism. Well, not specifically romanticism, but expressionism and character throughout his textures that other serialists did not even come close to approaching. But he was able to combine these things to a significant effect. Thank you.